Hi, I'm indie fantasy author Melinda Kucsera. Welcome to my series where I'm reading the first book in my Curse Breaker series, and that book is Curse Breaker Enchanted. Today we're dropping into Chapter 10, so let's get started. Chapter 10. Jagged stone comprised the tunnel Sarn followed, but a strip of piss-colored lumiere attempted to light it. His eyes made up for the lack as he considered his options, go back the way I came or find a new route. It took his internal map only a moment to return an answer. For the next 45 minutes, Sarn worked his way northeastward. When people icons appeared on his head map, he darted into one of the many staircases he passed. Anyone out this late had nothing good on his mind. Ahead, the tunnel belled out into a mile-long cavern, and its width was half its length. Best of all, no people icons littered that enclosed space. Lumiere crystals dotted the ceiling in constellations of stars, and up a long slope, an underground castle squatted over 2 miles from the primary areas of habitation. Why the Litharians had built a giant castle down here in the bowels of the earth no one knew, but speculation abounded. Sarn checked his head map again. Yes, a cluster of symbols belonging to the Rangers hung out about 100 feet from a rock pile on the surface, where the secret stairway in the north tower exited. Stonework broke up that expanse, providing plenty of cover for Sarn to slink between. A light blossomed behind him. At the same time, a translucent hand passed through his shoulder. In a burst of intense cold and pain immobilizing his arm, Sarn broke from cover to get away from the ghost, but he ripped when his magic exploded out of him in a wave of green radiance. It passed right through the ghost whose hands tried to catch the magic streaming past, its dead eyes fixed on Sarn. "What do you want?" But the apparition just turned his hand, so the light it had gathered poured out. Magic crashed down on Sarn, driving him to his knees until something inside him reached out and gathered it up. Before his magic retreated into him, it slid a warm membrane over his skin to revive his numb muscles. His now unfrozen arm still tingled, but he could use it again. Sarn pushed to his feet. Maybe he'd exhausted the ghost, or maybe it had no more tricks to pull. Whichever was the case, the ghost child just floated between him and the castle, mute and staring. "Why are you following me? I don't know how to help you, but I intend to try." Sarn scrubbed a hand over his face. When he lowered it, the ghost had disappeared. A rat scampered atop a nearby rock pile. Its whiskered nose twitched as it tested the air. It was scrawny, like the one he'd seen outside his cave. It's just one more coincidence in a night full of them. Sarn closed his traitorous eyes, faced the castle, and yanked his head map into view. Did my spectacular loss of control have an audience? No people icons popped up in the tunnel leading to this cavern, so maybe no one had seen him. The Rangers' symbols scattered across the meadow above, and their number included the commander. Damn, I must get moving. Sarn followed the vague markings on his head map as the map redrew itself, adding additional details while he walked. The remains of a footbridge spanning the dry moat gave Sarn a reference, and his magic had no interest in the rotting wood, so the flow of information cut off. Thank fate, because it was driving me to distraction. Sarn crossed that moat, expecting at any moment to feel a tingle between his shoulder blades, but no warning materialized. He entered through the raised portcullis and risked a glance at his surroundings, but only dust stirred in his passage. Nothing else moved, and no ghost showed up to greet him. Still seeing and sensing no one, he cut across a courtyard, dodging broken masonry and the things discarded by previous tenants. Sarn headed for a wood door on the side of the tower. Its hinges had swelled up from the damp, but a good tug wrenched it open. His eyes blazed, and their brilliance devoured the darkness, revealing a set of twisting steps. Cold gripped Sarn, slowing his progress. Against the sliver of unrelieved black at the stairs' top, a pale shape materialized. It was the ghost child again, in all its transparent creepiness, and it pointed at something behind Sarn, but there was nothing there. "What do you want? Why is a mindless ghost stalking me?" Sarn got no answer, as usual, just more finger-pointing. He checked over his shoulder and started as Hadrival reared out of the darkness, hand extended toward him. It can't be! Sarn scrambled out of reach, and the orphan master collapsed into the awful memories that had spawned him. Sarn rested his hooded head on the stonework and closed his eyes. Hadrival's dead. Durlo confirmed it, and I've no reason to doubt the man. Am I going mad? Sarn opened his eyes. The ghost boy was still there, his pallid face anxious. "Why did they kill you? Was it because your eyes are like mine, only paler?" The silence grated on Sarn's nerves. "Fine, don't answer. Let me pass. I'm in enough trouble as it is." The ghost cocked his head to one side, then slammed into him, and Sarn struggled to breathe. Darkness wavered at the edges of his vision, winnowing away the staircase as Sarn slumped onto a step. A moment later, the ghost tore out of his back and alighted on a step level with his eyes. The ghost seized his hood and threw it back. His fingers were ice cold as they traced the scar on Sarn's cheek. As the ghost faded away, he tried to speak, but the grave silenced him. What in the name of fate just happened? The Arctic cold gripping the stairwell dissipated as Sarn rose and hauled ass up the 4 remaining stories to a low-ceilinged room in the turret. He depressed a gray stone at the edge of a decorative mural, and a section of wall slid aside, revealing another unlit staircase twisting into unrelieved darkness because the Litharians had loved to carve stairs. Sarn rolled his eyes, and their glow swept upward until every step lay highlighted before him. There was no hint of anything supernatural, so he stepped onto the first step. His weight activated a mechanism, and it retracted the door. Sarn rushed toward a rectangular section of lightning shadow. He'd had enough ghosts for one night. Through a narrow gap between 2 boulders, he slid sideways and dropped into a crouch. I must settle things with Nolo and question him since he was the only other witness to tonight's doings. Not a thrilling prospect, but it was necessary. So Sarn listened for his masters. Are they looking for me yet? Every tree Nolo had passed with caution. He'd expected them to get up and move at any moment, but none of them had. They'd stood sentinel as usual. Still, he'd kept his eyes on them. Without the kid and his magical ability to reckon in a dense jungle, he'd twice lost his way, and that galled. I'm getting sloppy. Nolo stumbled out of the forest, and tension drained from his body as he stepped onto the gravel path winding around the menhirs. That peaceful moment shattered when Grigori rounded a standing stone and almost collided with him. Where's the kid? Grigori's worried eyes raked the undergrowth, searching for Sarn. He needed space. Where's Jurlo? I need to talk to him. Nolo scanned the meadow, but the commander must have retired from the field because he didn't spot him anywhere. What did he need space from? What did you find out there? His friend and fellow ranger regarded him as if he'd grown a second head or a serrated tail. Nolo performed a quick body check. One never knew what weirdness the forest might conjure up. What I said, it was bad there. The sort of bad I need to discuss with the commander before it becomes public knowledge. What exactly does bad mean when applied to a quasi-intelligent bunch of weeds? Are we about to see another example of their mobility? Because the first time was jarring enough. No one needs a repeat. Grigori crossed powerful arms over his barrel chest. The man was all muscle, but sharp too. I don't think so. Their mobility had a legitimate cause. Which was? For my ears only until I say otherwise. Jurlo snapped as he appeared to Grigori's left. Their boss's sudden appearance startled them, even though the compact ranger popped up when and where least expected. It was his modus operandi, and according to rumor, his raison d'etre. Jurlo stood 5'0" in boots and weighed 120 pounds soaking wet, but his compact frame housed a tactical genius. Jurlo gave Grigori a look, and the bodybuilder reacted as if he'd just recalled an assignment and hurried away to carry it out. Once he was out of earshot, Jurlo nodded to his second. Nolo launched into his tale but kept to the facts. One group robbed the other. They angered the forest and it retaliated. Something must have found the bodies and taken their valuables because when I arrived there was nothing worth stealing. So you think the first group you found robbed and killed the second group, then the forest killed the first group? Nolo nodded. Jurlo inclined his head. Well, it's in keeping with what we know of the forest. It follows a strict live and let live policy, unless blood shed within its confines. Break the rules and you get what we saw. I'd still like to know why it snatched Sarn. So would I. The abduction troubled Nolo, but not the death. They had an explanation. Shiari was 90% enchanted forestry, and those trees killed with extreme prejudice. But the kidnapping of Sarn had no rationale because it violated the Forest 3 rules. Solving it must take priority. Do you have a theory? The way the forest zeroed in on him, it must have sensed him. And there's more. I haven't told you the most disturbing part of this. Nolo grimaced, not wanting to recall the Queen of All Trees and her probing, eyeless stare. He shuddered. Some creatures should stay mythic, not trot themselves out to interfere in young lives. And why pick Sarn? Too much about that overgrown kid raised questions that had no answers. Oh no? Jurlo raised a brow, and it merged with the halo of frizz covering his head. The Queen of All Trees. She showed up, and Nolo opened and closed his hands, unable to find words to explain that bizarre episode. She almost snatched the kid. I couldn't have stopped her if she had. The report jolted Jurlo into action, and his black eyes took on a strange shine. Where's Sarn now? Nolo shook his head, ignoring the commander's question. Shivering, he still felt her eyeless gaze boring into him, but he saw no sign of her. Shaking his head, he resumed his report. She looked through me. It was the strangest experience of my life. Where is he? Where's Sarn? The deaths affected him. He ran off, likely to be sick, but he should return any moment now. In fact, I expected to find the kid propped against a boulder. His absence alarmed Nolo. The night's doings must have disturbed the laconic brat more than he'd realized. You don't know where he is? He's not here? No, I haven't seen the kid since you tore off after him. By the way, you have my thanks for pacifying the forest. Nolo shook his head. I didn't do anything. Jirlo's eyes sharpened on his second. You think the kid did? Nolo nodded and pointed to the oak trees looming over them. They wanted him to see it. I don't know why. The instant he did, the earth split open and all the bodies tumbled down into a grave the forest made for them. Afterwards, the trees closed the hole and stood still as if nothing had happened. They wiped out all the evidence, so even if the deaths had raided an investigation, I can't do anything about them or the thief who robbed their corpses. Nolo disliked the situation, but he could see no way to change it. Jirlo's eyes jerked to the left. Nolo followed his boss's gaze and relaxed. Sarn stood there, silent as usual, and the glow of his eyes reflected off the dust coating him. Wherever he'd gone, he'd gotten filthy. Sarn looked like what he was, a walking, talking contradiction. The right side of his face was a little too perfect, but a scar ran from his hairline to his jaw, marring the left side. It was a gift from a psychopath, and a harsh reminder that the Rangers had failed to protect him. No attitude, bad or otherwise, manifested. The kid stood there cloaked and hooded, with nothing but his radiant eyes visible. Their glow dyed a strip of his pale face as green as his eyes. The brat was 6.5 feet of shadows, secrets, and silence, making him one tough nut to crack, and 4 years of whacking away at his reserve hadn't yielded a single chink. Where have you been? Jirlo followed up his question with a glare. Sarn said nothing. His luminous gaze remained fixed on a point 1.5 feet above the commander's head as he tensed for a blow that would never come. Fear locked in his silence. The fool intends to ignore the question. Damn him! Nolo stayed quiet. He had to let this play out. Sarn had an iron will, but so did their commander. If not prevented, they would lock horns in a contest of wills. The brat never gave ground, not even when he skirted too close to insubordination, and the threat of a whipping rolled right off him. But give Sarn a direct order, and his magic forced him to comply. But direct orders robbed the kid of his free will, turning him into an automaton. Nolo clenched his fist. It was an unfortunate consequence of his promise to obey Lord Joranth Nalshira. His lordship had then handed Sarn and his promise of obedience off to Jirlo. The brat still fought it, but his promise always won, and the kid hated it. And Jirlo was as determined to get an answer as Sarn was to avoid giving one. In about 30 seconds, the commander would demand a reply and compel Sarn to cough one up. Above all, I must avoid invoking that compulsion. Nolo ground his teeth in frustration. Thank God the brat was rangy and light enough to manhandle when his stubbornness got the better of him. Give me a minute to sort this out, Nolo said to Jirlo as he seized Sarn and towed him out of earshot. The kid had better have an excellent reason for vanishing. Let go of me. Sarn wrenched his arm free and glowered down at Nolo. He was a half-foot taller than Death's marksman, and he put those precious inches to good use. You must give me something. You can't disappear and say nothing about it. I need a reason. Why didn't they know the 3 rules? What? The segue threw Nolo for a loop. Why didn't they know about the rules? Everyone knows them. You can't live in Shiari and be ignorant of them, not if you intend to survive long. The question had gnawed at Sarn on his trip to the surface. Why did that boy die, and why did his ghost chase me through the lower quarters? There was more to this than a simple case of hikers breaking the rules. Sarn paced as he waited for Nolo to answer his original question, but Death's marksman just folded his arms and waited for Sarn to work the problem through. What motivated those murderers? They must have known their lives would be forfeit. Why didn't the forest protect that boy? Their 3 rules safeguarded children under their boughs. Why not this child? Why did the forest allow his death? Sarn's eyes were greener than his, and he was bursting with magic, but the forest had never harmed him. That boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Sarn was a dozen years older than him, and he'd been in and out of that forest over the last 4 years. It made little sense. Why had the forest bothered to exact revenge for the boy's death? It had allowed the killing to happen. Would the forest pay a penalty for breaking their own rules? Sarn put that uncomfortable line of questioning aside for now. The enchanted forest covered most of the country. Any penalty resulting from the forest's failure to uphold its rules would affect the Rangers, and he served them. Not a cheerful thought. Well, why did this happen? You must have a theory. They might not have been ignorant of the rules. Nolo adjusted his utility belt. Sarn leaned against the boulder and gestured for Nolo to elaborate. They may have thought the rules were rubbish. Nolo shrugged. The forest is strange, yes, but it's not usually so mobile. I haven't seen anything like what we witnessed in all the time I've lived here. Maybe Group 1 thought the rules were an old wives' tale and took their chances, but this is off topic. Nolo chopped a hand through the air, closing the issue. You still haven't told me where you went and what you've been doing. Sarn stood there, flabbergasted for a moment. Am I the only one who sees the magic in the trees? It ran in rivers of emerald light up and down their trunks and snaked across the ground, connecting them in a spider's web of power and awareness. His master must have seen branches shift into steps, nuts or fruit falling to take the edge off hunger, roots flattening out of the way, all proving the forest was awake. Other people must have experienced it too. The enchanted forest is everywhere. It's impossible to travel anywhere without encountering the forest's peculiar brand of intelligence. Or was it? Sarn remembered a flat plain crowded with spires on a strip of treeless land bordered by a river. A place of towers, Sarn said without meaning to, as he slid down a menhir and pressed his fingers into his eyes. Memories were seeds on the wind, swirling just out of reach. Images flickered in each one. In them, a child around his son's age clung to him. It was Myron. Sarn recognized his half-brother's features in the boy's face. In one scene, he carried his brother on his back as he ran through twisting alleyways, pursued by someone. Pain stabbed his ear, cutting his hearing in half as he pushed those memories away. What is it? Nolo crouched in front of Sarn as his brain re-engaged. Shari has cities, other than Dakora, the capital. But Sarn wasn't sure about that. Dakora was the home of his heroes, the Guardians. If only they were here, they'd know how to help a ghost and whether his death would spawn any further unpleasantness. Yes, they're in craters where the enchanted forest refuses to grow. There are 2 large ones, Dakora and Renthalia, and a bunch of smaller ones. Sarn let his hands fall from his face to his lap. He'd once lived in one of those cities. We're not near any cities, are we? Sarn wanted the answer to be no. Nolo shook his head. No, not near in any sense of the word. It's a month's journey to Dakora by foot if they cooperate. Nolo nodded to the trees surrounding them. Shorter by river, though. 15 days, I think, by boat, if it doesn't make too many stops along the way. And the weather's favorable. The other cities are much further away. You don't realize how vast Shayari is until you try to go somewhere. You don't think they came from a city. Well, now, neither did Sarn. A bunch of fools could never reach here if they disregarded such life-saving rules. I don't know. But you're avoiding the question, and I still need an answer. Nolo fixed him with the look. Sarn shook it off. If they aren't from the city, and they didn't grow up in a mountain stronghold, what else is there? Just the branchers, right? And they know the rules. They live in the forest. Something Sarn found unfathomable. Why would anyone want to make his home in enchanted trees' branches? What if the tree took to wandering? There goes the village. Sarn shuddered. But the branchers existed, and they had many tree-chopped communities scattered all over Shayari. Sarn pushed to his feet, and Nolo copied him. Once he was vertical, he recalled another group making Shayari its home, the Wanderers. They lived out of wagons and traveled about the country exchanging news and goods. The tight-knit group never settled for more than a fortnight in any place, but they must be well versed in the rules. Is there something else? Nolo compressed his lips together, but remained quiet and troubled. His silence answered the question. There was something, but Death's marksman refused to discuss it. Who else is there? Sarn paced. City folk, branchers, mountain folk, the Wanderers. He faced his master. They came from outside, from beyond Shayari's borders. But how? Kadron Ironwind shut the border centuries ago. There's a magic wall or something keeping everyone out and us in. It keeps most people out, yes, but allows some people to cross. Those who mean Shayari and her people no harm. How do you know? The answer was obvious, and it slapped Sarn upside the head. He approached his master, agog at, and yet drawn to the idea of immigrants in his land. You came from out there? How? Where? Sarn gestured west, toward the distant border. You answer my question, and I'll answer yours. Where did you go when you ran off? Sarn turned his back on Nolo and let his silence speak for him. You must give me something. I don't think you realize how serious this is. Durlo could have you flogged for dereliction of duty until your back is a bloody ruin. Give me something, anything to explain your absence. Stuck in a no-win situation, Sarn shook his head and remained silent. The magic lighting his eyes also prevented him from lying. But if I mention my son, they'll take him away from me. A flogging was a small price to pay for the child who brightened his days. Sarn bit his lip to keep the truth from escaping and tasted blood. Nolo refused to give up on him. Were you sick? Sarn shook his head, refusing to speak. One word could undo everything his silence safeguarded. Nolo searched for another reason. Did you check on your brother? Sarn nodded. Since his primary reason for his visit below ground had nothing to do with Myron, he bit down hard on the urge to speak, but the truth struggled to break free, slicing the inside of his mouth as he fought to let the partial lie stand. Sarn mashed his lips into a thin line to keep from screaming. All right, why didn't you say so? It's a reason I can understand and one Jurlo can work with. How is your brother? Fine, Sarn said in a hoarse whisper as he struggled to find words. I surprised him. He hadn't expected to see me before dawn, which was true, so his magic retracted its blades. Sarn swallowed the metallic taste of blood, wishing for a sip of water. Why did you return? Nola regarded him intently. Sarn shrugged. I gave my word. I must come back. No one, including his brother, had thought Sarn would keep said promise. He'd indentured himself at 16 to free Myron from the cycle of poverty and had lived up to its terms no matter what. Why is everyone waiting for me to shirk it? What about the border? Sarn asked, unwilling to let the subject drop. What about it? Nolo looked away. Apparently that was a sensitive subject. Why would anyone want to come here? What could make a magical wonderland sound like a pleasant place to live? Sarn studied Death's marksman, a.k.a. Nolo, seeking signs of foreignness, but found none. Shiarans came in all colors from coal black to subterranean pasty, and Shiari was so damn big, every part had a distinct accent. Did the outside world still exist? You know where I went. Tell me what you know about the border. When did you cross it? How did you cross it? What's out there? Sarn gestured to the forest. Nolo chopped his hand through the air, cutting off the questions. Turning, he cast his blank eyes away from Sarn. As the past weighed on Nolo, an ebony quiver flickered on his back, then faded. Tell me what you know. Sarn waited, but Nolo shook his head. Had talk of the border reminded his master of something he'd spent years forgetting? What did I glimpse right before Nolo turned his back? Was it a desperate man trying to hide his pain? The truth ripped away the gag held in place by secrecy and fear. The need for one person to know about the son he'd give his life to protect mastered Sarn. He opened his mouth, but Nolo turned, and the moment died in silence. Death's marksman showed no sign of ever having known suffering. Sarn shut his mouth before the truth could escape. The Nolo who stood before him now would never understand. Another time, perhaps. If you don't want a whipping, then I need to speak to Jurlo. And you need to... Nolo flailed around for a task and found none, because the Rangers never let me do anything. Not that it matters. I have a ghost to help and a mystery to solve. Sarn felt the hollow stare of the ghost boy, but there was another group unaccounted for. Who did I leave out? The question faded as Sarn caught the glare of a skunk, too interested in the conversation to be natural. You need to go with Spar and Grellin, Jurlo put in, startling Nolo and the skunk. The creature retreated to the shadows but stayed within earshot. Sarn dismissed it as another coincidence. Magic made everyone, even the local fauna, edgy. Of course, it had checked him out. I would too if I were that skunk. The commander jerked a thumb at the semi-retired rangers lumbering up from behind him. Given the hour, neither Grellin nor Spar would have any work to do now. What will the pair do with me other than get in my way? Sarn ground his teeth. There are questions in need of answers, but I must find them on the sly. Nolo already closed the case in his mind. I'm on my own on this one. Grizzled and wiry, Spar, the 50-ish bowyer, armed the rangers. Age bent his back, giving it the curve of his beloved longbow. He gave Grellin a look, and Grellin, the Fletcher, held both calloused hands up in surrender. He had a longbowman's top-heavy physique, and looked like he might tip over on his chicken leg. Jurlo ignored their exchange. Those under him, retirees included, followed his orders no matter how strange they might be. Well, come on, boy, we haven't got all night. Bard gestured toward Mount Eredrin. Neither of his minders spoke until they'd walked out of Jurlo's ever-expanding earshot. Grellin elbowed Sarn, catching him in the stomach since he towered over both artisans. What'd you do now? I didn't do anything. Grellin and Spar shared a disbelieving look. You must have done something. Think hard, boy. I'm not a child, Sarn muttered, but no one believed it. At least the men bracketing him had 3 decades and change on him. Still, it was the principle of the thing. So you say. Grellin spread his hands wide and shrugged. Sarn folded his arms over his chest to hide his clenched fists. He wanted to pummel something. Anything would do. They hit the trail leading up the mountain and followed one of its side branches. The trail rose as it curved around the mountain's east face and bent toward its northern one. Another 100 feet on, it straightened out, as much as the topography allowed, and the terrain turned rocky before they peeled off along a dirt path into a patch of spindly trees. The pines on the mountainside extended their branches towards the light and life flowing through their enchanted brethren a mile or so away. But they remained non-magical because no enchantments could cross the twin circles of menhir standing between the forest and the meadow. Tonight I had difficulty passing their cordon as well. Might there be a connection? Sarn wondered as Spar called a halt. An outcropping made a perfect vantage point, and Sarn commandeered it. Uncounted miles of enchanted forestry melted into the dark horizon. From this angle, it looked sinister. Even with his map superimposed over it, he could spot no sign of either murder site from this distance. Damn, there went that avenue of investigation. An inky gloom hid the forest's twinkling lights, and above his perch the sky was a starless indigo expanse. Where'd the stars go? Is that black stuff from the murder site spreading? It must be, because its malevolence concentrated on the mountain where he sat. Sarn shivered. My son is safe. Her seeds will protect him until I can. Morning wasn't far off, but it would bring no relief. Even the animals sensed it. Further down the slope, sheep and other herd beasts milled about, too restive to graze and too tense to sleep. Shepherds kept watch, but they must have felt it too, because the slightest sound sent them running. 2 dogs barked as they circled a stray sheep, and even they seemed to know. It's not over, not by a long shot. How can I find out what it is, or what'll come of it, without breaking my word? Sarn rested his chin on his knee and grappled with that problem. His magic wouldn't allow him to go against Durlo's orders, no matter what was brewing in the forest. I heard some funny rumors. The bowyer tossed something, and its point stuck fast in a pine tree. Good toss, Grelling grunted. Watch this. The Fletcher produced a dirk, took aim, and threw. His dagger knocked Spars out of the tree, and both fell into a bush. Spar whistled at his luck, then took a sip from his hip flask. Up with your young bones, go fetch them, and maybe we'll let you take a turn. Sarn just nodded and obeyed before the promises he'd sworn turned Spar's statement into a command. Both dirks had a gemstone set in their hilts, garnet for Grelin and quartz for Spar, and the stupid things called to him, whispering their whereabouts. A shiver passed down his spine as Sarn set his mind to ignore the stone's voices. Now wasn't the time to let his wayward gift get out of control. As he straightened, blades in hand, he met the eyes of the ghost boy as a translucent hand turned Spar's knife until it pricked his finger. Blood welled up, flecked with shining green, and dripped onto a small, limpid hand. The specter's fingers closed around it, and his blood passed into the creature, but it had no visible effect. Hurry up and fetch those! Sarn backed away and handed the dirks to their owners before fleeing to his rock. Clinging to its reassuring solidity, he stared at the apparition following him. What do you want? How can I help you? Is that even what you want? The air chilled, and his eyes lost some of their luminescence as darkness bore down on Sarn. His magic muttered its usual complaint, "Unnatural!" But Sarn ignored it. Nothing about tonight has been natural. He rubbed his arms to warm them. The ghost waved, frantic for him to move, so Sarn pivoted and scanned the area. His minders had fallen into a deep discussion about a friendly wager, so no danger was forthcoming from those two. His breath misted as the cold bit through his clothes, just like at the murder site. Sarn sent his magic through the boulder under his rump, and it radiated out in concentric rings. Before it went too far and became entangled in whatever was going on out there in the forest, Sarn retracted it. His magic fought him, but it was angry he'd cut its exploration short. I can't risk it. What if it traps me? Who will take care of my son? Myron will try, but Ran isn't his responsibility. He's mine, and so are you. One last tug sent his magic crashing into Sarn, warming him as the ghost popped up in front of him. What is it? He asked the ghost in a whisper. In answer, the ghost pointed at a patch of shadow, then to his eyes. Are you saying the shadows have eyes? Sarn crossed to the bush and pushed its branches aside, seeking whatever had upset the ghost. Nothing lurked in the shadows except an ant colony. Compound eyes watched Sarn from a nearby branch, but it was just a roach. On the ground, the ants paced around the roach's shadow, and their paths bent to form a chain of interconnected circles. What is this? Sarn pointed at the antics of the ants. The ghost's eyes widened, and he dove, just missing Sarn. Why did you do that? Something bit Sarn's hand, and he let go of the branch. Its tip was red with his blood. Sarn backed away. The foliage within the stone circles held no intelligence or enchantments. Neither did shadows have eyes. There's no evil overlord, and no archmages either. No one's watching my comings and going except my masters. And the ghost child haunting me. This is more evidence of my deteriorating sanity. Or was it? Was something out there, or had shock coupled with his usual paranoia made Sarn imagine that cold black substance? There was no way to know until they let him off work. Then he could go back into the forest and find out what was what if he dared. But until then, he was stuck on this mountain with the ghost gripping his arm. Go away and leave me alone. The ghost shook his head, making his short illusory hair fly. Sarn dropped his head into his hands. His babysitters had forgotten about him, but not the ghost. Its glassy green eyes threw accusations at him. Why am I dead and you're not? Sarn squeezed his eyes closed, but the dead child stared at him from inside his mind, and the thing had company. They were all orphans, the same as him, and they were all dead before any of them had begun to live. Their vacant eyes pierced him, while their white lips mouthed the one question he could never answer. Why you and not us? I don't know. Leave me alone, Sarn stupidly said aloud. You don't know what? Grigori asked, startling Sarn. The dead didn't flee back to their holes in his head. They lingered in his peripheral vision, making Sarn edgy. Who are you talking to? Grigori made a show of looking around. Sarn realized his minders had stopped minding him. Shaking his head, he remained silent. Grigori already thinks I'm an idiot. The first gray light of the coming dawn brushed blue streaks into the sky to his left. Maybe daylight will bring some answers. Sarn rubbed his tired eyes. Get off your ass and follow me. I've got work for you to do before you go. But, Sarn pointed to the lightning east. But nothing. The sooner you move, the sooner you can go. Your brother can get along without you for 1 more hour. He's not an invalid. True, Myron was able-bodied, but Rand was 4, and his son would not understand if he was late. Besides, if he stayed any longer, he wouldn't have time to re-enter the forest before procuring food for his small family and the 24 orphans who depended on him. If Sarn didn't go now, he couldn't investigate until late that afternoon. Could what he'd seen wait that long? I don't have any other options unless I take my son with me, but I can't endanger him. Are you coming? Grigori asked. Do I have a choice? Grigori didn't answer, so Sarn rose and followed. Where am I going? Sarn brushed the dirt from his trousers. Down to the river. There's some sensitive cargo Durlo needs unloaded ASAP. What goods are too important for the dockhands to manage? Sarn wondered about that as Grigori increased his pace. And that was chapter 10 of Curse Breaker Enchanted, and I'm not going to read another chapter tonight. That one was a long one. We had a lot happen in it. We re-met Durlo because we already met him in a previous chapter. And Sarn returned to the Rangers. They argued, but we also talked about Shari and that it's a large country. People live in the branches of the enchanted trees. Those are the branchers. We won't see a lot of the branchers in the Curse Breaker series. Sarn, well, you heard what he thought of it. He's not a fan of that kind of living situation. So the few times he will encounter them, he will keep it brief because it's just not something he wants to think about or deal with or even know exists unless he absolutely has to. It just freaks him out. There's also the Wanderers, and we'll meet someone who used to be a Wanderer, because there's someone who's part of the permanent cast who was part of that group and had married someone and now lives in Mount Eredrin. And yeah, so that is chapter 10. So we've got some more information about the country, that there is a magical wall around it, and in a future book we will see that wall. We'll get up close and personal and figure out what this thing is, how does it work, how do we cross it. That's coming in down the line in a future book, so you can look forward to that. And speaking of future books, if you want to read ahead or read along, there are currently 9 books in the Curse Breaker series, not including prequels or sequels that feature other characters on other missions. So you can pick up Curse Breaker Enchanted in ebook, in paperback, in hardcover. It's also available, if you want a guy reading it, as an AI narrated audiobook from Google Play. And it's pretty good, the AI. I'm not a voice actor, so I'm just doing the best that I can to read this and try and give the characters sort of personality. The only character that I know the best, obviously, is Sarn. Most of the Curse Breaker books are from his perspective, so I know him the best. And you can also pick up all of the sequels. There's links on my website. I have links in the show notes of the description, depending on where you're listening to this, with links to those. So if you want to get a copy of Curse Breaker Enchanted and read ahead and go on to the sequels, you can certainly do that. They're all available. They're pretty much everywhere. My books are not just on Amazon, they're widely distributed. But that's all for today. And next time we will dive in at chapter 11, and not to spoil it too much, but in chapter 11, something major happens that sends the entire plot and Sarn off on a completely different trajectory. That's why Curse Breaker Enchanted is actually 2 books, because something happens in chapter 11 that completely throws him off, and he's not able to get back to this mystery until the second half of the book, which is actually a different book. They're too closely related to separate them, so I've left them as one book. We'll get more Enchanted Forest and more Rangers when we return. So I hope you'll come back. Have a great day or evening, depending on where you're listening to this. Don't forget to like or subscribe or follow or whatever. Do the things, all the things. Share this with other people so they can enjoy Curse Breaker Enchanted too. All right. That's it for this time.